This Sunday, we will be fasting, commemorating SAR betmuz. The Mishnah Masechet Tanya teaches us that five things happened on or around SAR betmuz, which we commemorate through this Tanya, through our fasting. These events happened at different times in Jewish history, just on or around the same date. The luchot that Moshe brought down from Har Sinai that were broken on SAR betmuz. During the time, likely, of the first Beit HaMikdash, the Karban Tamid that was brought each day in the Beit HaMikdash was stopped due to persecution. In the second Beit HaMikdash, the outer walls of the city were broken through on SAR betmuz. We're also taught of, during the period of the Greeks, a Sefer Torah was publicly burned and an image was put in the Beit HaMikdash. What we find on this day, SAR betmuz, are events that happened in biblical times, in First Temple, in Moshe times, in the times of the first Beit HaMikdash, in Greek period, and in the Roman period, all commemorated around this day. And that's one purpose, what we're commemorating fasting SAR betmuz. But it's important to note that SAR betmuz is also the beginning of a period of Bein HaMitzarim, 3 weeks, that connect two dates specifically around the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash. Of course, SAR betmuz, when they broke through the city, ultimately broke through the walls of the city, ultimately culminating in the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash on Tisha B'Av. And I'd like to focus for a few minutes on that period of Bein HaMitzarim and its meaning. There's clearly, in terms of the practices of Bein HaMitzarim, a connection between the laws of Avilut that we're familiar with, and God forbid someone loses a loved one, and the laws of the 3 weeks. We don't take haircuts, we don't attend weddings, people don't get married during the period of the 3 weeks. And we have a sense that there is obviously this connection to regular Avilut. In one instance, mourning the loss of a loved one, in this instance, mourning the loss of the Beit HaMikdash. The question that I'd like to focus on is a kind of a natural challenge that we have in connecting to this period in history. After all, it's something that happened thousands of years ago, 2,000 years ago, and the first Beit HaMikdash longer than that. And isn't it a challenge for us to be able to connect to something that happened so long ago? And I'd like to share with you an insight of Rabbi Soloveitchik, something where he teaches us the penetrating insight of Chazal into human nature around this particular practice. The Gemara in Yevamot notes that there is a difference between the Avelut with which we are familiar on a personal level and the Avelut that happens around this period of the 3 weeks. The Gemara calls one Avelut de Yachid, an individual Avelut, when an individual family loses a loved one, and Avelut de Rabim, which is a mourning, an experience of the community, mourning the loss, such as mourning the loss of the temple, which is a communal Avelut. The Gemara says that Avelut de Yachid is what it calls an Avelut Chadasha. It's a new Avelut. And the Avelut de Rabim, the one that happens around Churban Beit HaMikdash, is Avelut Yishana. It's an old Avelut, it's mourning something that happened a long time ago. The Gemara doesn't explain exactly the difference between one that's called Avelut Chadasha and one that's called Avelut Yishana. In a certain sense, it's obvious. But Rabbi Soloveitchik said, this distinction actually points to something very fundamental about the way that it plays out. Think about how a person goes through the period of individual, personal mourning. When someone loses a loved one, life stops. Person can't go to work. Person doesn't take care of his or her bodily needs. Person's social life stops, etc. And halacha, Shiva, actually expresses that ideal. And over the course of Avilut, we move from Shiva to Shloshim to Yud Bet Chodesh. It's a process of reintegrating into society. Now think about that, and what you note, Rabbi Soloveitchik says, the 3 weeks are exactly the mirror image of our Avelut de Yachid. Avelut de Rabim works in the opposite direction. It begins with the 3 weeks, which parallel the Yud Bet Chodesh. You don't get married, basic things don't happen. It's a minor level of Avelut. And after the 3 weeks begins, we follow that for a bit, we enter the 9 days, which is similar to Shloshim. There's certain things that kick in, showering, laundering, clothing, which parallels Shloshim, ultimately culminating in Tisha B'Av, where we have practices of Shiva. We sit on the floor, we stop learning Torah, etc. What we see is that Avelut de Rabim is a mirror image of Avelut Yachid. Why? Avelut Yachid, the person experiences the loss naturally and has to work slowly to reintegrate into society. Avelut de Rabim is the opposite. Avilut Rabim, it's hard to connect to. It's something that happened so long ago. And what Chazal understood is that we begin by just getting a taste. We fast on Shiva Asar B'Tamuz and start with some focus of Avelut in order to get ourselves into the mindset, which we then move into the 9 days, ultimately to Tisha B'Av, in the hope that we can move towards joining that narrative of what it meant to have a Beit HaMikdash, what it meant to have a powerful Jewish society in Eretz Yisrael. We can rejoin that narrative and experience the loss in a more powerful way. As we begin the 3 weeks, let's take the opportunity to focus our attention on Am Yisrael, Eretz Yisrael, the spirit of the Beit HaMikdash, to be able to rejoin the power of that narrative. Shabbat Shalom.